This story is a fictional narrative created solely for entertainment purposes. All names, characters, and events are fictional. It does not depict real people, real military actions, or real incidents. I remember the Colorado wind cutting across the back lot of Fort Carson as if it knew something I did not. The Wounded Warrior Recognition Ceremony was minutes away, and soldiers were gathering inside the main hall. From where I sat in my wheelchair, the sound of applause and speeches drifted faintly through the walls like echoes from a world I no longer felt connected to. I had survived an IED blast in Afghanistan 7 months earlier, but the recovery had been far more complicated than the explosion itself. Metal could be repaired quickly, trust could not. My stepsister Vanessa walked behind me, acting attentive in front of everyone else, yet every time her hands touched the wheelchair handles, a chill ran down my spine. She was 2 years younger than me, but had always carried a strange resentment that grew sharper after our mother passed away. Today, she wore a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. She leaned down slightly and whispered so quietly the wind almost carried it away. "You do not need this ceremony, Rowan. You do not need the house either." Her breath brushed my ear, warm against my skin, yet her words froze me completely. Before I could respond, the wheelchair jerked suddenly as if something snapped loose beneath me. The right wheel trembled, the frame shuddered. I pressed the brake instinctively, but the chair continued to roll forward. The brake did not catch. It did not even slow. My pulse slammed against my ribs as my chair rolled toward the long, sloped concrete path behind the hall. That slope was built for equipment carts and loading vehicles, not for a wounded soldier trapped in a chair with no functioning brakes. My hands flew to the wheels, trying to control the descent, but the chair picked up speed as if the ground itself tilted harder with every passing second. Vanessa stepped back, watching. Her expression changed in an instant. The polite smile vanished, replaced by a cold certainty that told me everything. This was not an accident. She had planned this moment. I felt gravity pull me downward faster. The concrete blurred beneath me. The edge of the parking area approached like a hard, unforgiving wall. Panic rose in my throat. My arms strained to slow the chair. Nothing worked. For a terrifying heartbeat, I thought this was how my story ended, rolling helplessly into a fate chosen not by an enemy overseas but by my own family. Then a voice thundered across the air. "Stop! Step away from her!" The command hit like a shockwave. My chair was still moving, but that voice anchored something inside me. I twisted enough to see a tall figure striding from the back entrance of the hall, his presence unmistakable even before I recognized the uniform. It was General Marcus Elwood, the 4-star commander overseeing the ceremony. His face was sharp with disbelief and fury as he looked from me to Vanessa. Military police sprinted behind him, boots slamming the pavement. Vanessa froze as if the ground locked her in place. The chair slid faster. My palms burned, my vision shook. Then the general shouted again, louder than the wind itself. "We have an attempted homicide! Secure her now!" The words tore through the chaos. In that moment, as my chair skidded down the last stretch of concrete, I understood two things with absolute clarity. Someone had tried to end my life, and an even larger truth was waiting behind this moment, waiting to break open everything I thought I knew about my family. Have you ever trusted someone in your own family only to realize too late they wanted you gone? I used to believe that surviving Afghanistan would be the hardest chapter of my life. Yet, the months that followed taught me otherwise. I was 34 years old, a staff sergeant who had spent more than a decade in the Army, and I had always pictured the end of my career happening on my own terms. Instead, an IED blast outside Kandahar ripped that control away in a single, violent second. The explosion threw me across a dirt road, and when I finally opened my eyes, everything from my lower back down burned with a fire I could not escape. The medics worked fast, the evacuation was flawless, but the damage was already written deep into my spine. For months afterward, doctors told me the same thing: healing would come slowly, and I would need a wheelchair for a while, possibly longer. I learned how to maneuver the chair with discipline, the same way I learned weapons drills in basic training, but it never felt natural. I missed the rhythm of marching the weight of boots on gravel, the feeling of standing eye to eye with my soldiers. I told myself the wheelchair was temporary, but the truth was I hated needing it. I hated depending on anyone. That was the mindset I carried home to Colorado Springs when my deployment officially ended. Returning to an empty house was harder than I expected. My mother had passed away 2 years earlier after a long illness, leaving behind a home filled with photographs, folded quilts, and the soft scent of lavender she used to keep in every room. My father had walked out of our lives when I was 8 years old, leaving nothing behind except a box of old mail and a last name that carried no meaning for me anymore. My mother never remarried, but she did meet someone for a short time. A woman named Diana, who eventually brought a daughter from a previous relationship into our family. That daughter was Vanessa. She was 17 when she moved in. Beautiful, sharp, ambitious, the kind of girl who made every room feel like a competition. My mother tried to make us close, tried to create warmth between two girls who had never asked to be sisters, but Vanessa was never subtle about who she believed deserved my mother's attention more. After my mom died, Vanessa stayed in the house for a while, then moved out a few months later, leaving behind a trail of bitterness that only seemed to grow as years passed. I joined the Army and built a life defined by structure and purpose, while she drifted between jobs and relationships, claiming she was still searching for her path. Every time we spoke, she reminded me that the house belonged to my mother, not to me, even though the will stated clearly that I was its only heir. She said it was unfair. She said I already had a career and a future while she was trying to figure hers out. I tried for years to be patient. I reminded myself that grief had twisted us in different ways. I told myself that resentment fades if you give it enough understanding. I was wrong. When word came that I would receive recognition at the Wounded Warrior ceremony, I thought she might be happy for me, or at least pretend to be. Instead, she narrowed her eyes in that calculating way she had and asked if they were only giving me the honor because people felt sorry for me. I laughed it off then, but that comment stayed with me longer than it should have. Preparing for the ceremony should have filled me with pride. Yet most days I felt weighed down by the silence in my house and the tension in every conversation with Vanessa. She visited often, claiming she wanted to help during my recovery, but her presence never felt like help. She criticized the way I pushed myself during physical therapy, said I was rushing, said the Army was only praising me because I made a dramatic story, not because I did anything special. Sometimes she acted sweet and supportive. Then, the very next morning, she would accuse me of pretending to be stronger than I really was, as if weakness was something I enjoyed. I reminded her again and again that this ceremony was not about me being a hero. It was about acknowledging what every wounded service member endures, the long, unseen battles that follow the one everyone else notices. But Vanessa only rolled her eyes and said public praise was overrated. There were moments when I tried to bridge the distance between us. I invited her to dinner, told her she could stay in the guest room anytime she needed a break from her apartment, even offered to help her with a job application she claimed she wanted to finish. No matter what I did, she found a way to twist it. She accused me of acting superior, accused me of thinking I was the chosen child simply because Mom left me the house. She never understood that the house was not a prize to me. It was the last safe place I had, the one thing that reminded me of who my mother believed I could become. As the ceremony approached, I noticed her mood changing. She became quieter, not kinder, just focused in a way that unsettled me. She asked too many questions about the house, about the title transfer, about whether I had updated the insurance. At the time, I brushed it off, assuming it was another wave of jealousy, but now I wish I had listened to the warning in my own instincts. The night before the ceremony, she stood in the doorway of my room, watching me adjust the uniform blouse I planned to wear, even though I would be seated for most of the event. She said nothing at first, then, with a thin smile, asked if I was nervous. I told her yes, but proud. She shrugged and said people like me always got attention one way or another. It was meant as an insult, but I ignored it. I had learned to ignore so much. Looking back, every sign was there waiting for me to notice. Waiting for me to understand how far jealousy can push someone. I just did not realize yet that pride can blind you as effectively as denial can. Have you ever had family act jealous of your success no matter how hard you fought for it? The morning I returned to Fort Carson for the first time since the explosion, the sky over Colorado Springs carried the pale blue glow that appears after a cold night. The kind of sky that makes the mountains look carved from steel rather than stone. Riding in the passenger seat while Vanessa drove felt surreal, almost like I was being taken back to a life that used to fit me perfectly, but now sat awkwardly on my shoulders. I kept my uniform neatly folded beside me, though I would not wear it until the ceremony. My hands rested on my lap, the familiar ache in my lower spine pulsing with every bump in the road. I had spent months building up the courage to return here, yet the moment the gates came into view, my chest tightened. Soldiers and passing vehicles nodded out of habit, recognizing the decal on the windshield even without knowing who I was. The routine courtesy stung. Once they recognized me as Staff Sergeant Mercer, the woman who had led patrols and briefings with unwavering steadiness. Now, I was just someone being driven onto the base in a wheelchair. Vanessa seemed almost cheerful in contrast, humming lightly as if the day belonged to her. She wore a soft sweater and sunglasses as though heading to brunch, not accompanying her wounded stepsister to one of the most meaningful events of my life. She glanced at my wheelchair in the back seat and rolled her eyes in a way she did not bother to hide. "You know, Ro, I do not understand why they are giving you this ceremony. You were in an explosion, sure, but lots of people get hurt in the military." It sounded like she was trying to make her voice sound casual, but the venom underneath gave her away. Instead of responding, I counted the seconds until we reached the parking lot near the Soldier Family Care Center. When she pulled into a space, she got out slowly, forcing me to wait. The passenger door finally swung open. She grabbed the wheelchair, pulled it from the back, and let it hit the ground harder than necessary. A jolt went through the frame. I frowned. Something rattled inside the left wheel, the same rattle I had heard twice earlier that week. I checked the brake while she watched me with that impatient expression she used whenever she wanted me to feel like a burden. The brake lever felt looser than usual, but still clicked into place. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was imagining things. She pushed me toward the entrance, her hands tight on the handles, her pace faster than comfortable. My back tensed from the abrupt movement. As we reached the hallway leading to the Warrior Transition Unit, I saw a familiar figure step out from a doorway. Staff Sergeant Jake Nolan. Same confident stride, same easy grin. Except this time, the grin faltered when he saw the wheelchair. "Rowan. Holy, what are you doing here already? I thought the doctors were keeping you home until next month." His voice carried the warmth of someone who genuinely cared. Nolan had been with me on multiple deployments, had ridden in the same Humvee during long night routes, and had shared enough black coffee and terrible jokes to make him feel like a brother. I smiled as best I could. "They cleared me for travel," I said. "Just for the ceremony. Nothing too intense." He crouched to my level, resting his arms over his knees, examining the chair like he was evaluating gear before a mission. "How are you, really?" he asked. I hesitated only a second. Better than I was. Not where I want to be, but moving forward. He nodded slowly, then tapped the wheel with 2 fingers. "This one sounds loose. Want me to take a look?" Very slight tremor went through me. I almost said yes. Then Vanessa cut in sharply. "She's fine, Nolan. She just likes attention." Nolan stood and looked at her eyes, narrowing just enough to show he had not missed the hostility. Then he turned back to me, softening his expression. "If you need anything, I am around. And remember, you do not need to push yourself for anyone. You already proved enough out there." When he walked away, I felt the weight of unspoken understanding settle between us. He did not say it out loud, but I knew he sensed something was off. Vanessa resumed pushing me toward the administrative wing, her tone dropping from sharp to icy. "Soldiers pity you because they do not know the real you," she said. "They think you are some brave, wounded hero, but you were always average, Rowan. Just average." The words hit harder than I wanted them to. Not because I believed them, but because she said them so easily, as if she had been waiting to release them for years. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "Vanessa, you do not have to come tomorrow if this is too much for you." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "I am the only family you have left. Of course I have to come. Besides, maybe someone there will remember my name too." The bitterness clung to her voice like smoke, refusing to fade. We reached the elevator and she pushed me inside. As the doors closed, I felt the tremor in the wheelchair again. Something shifted under my left wheel, a faint wobble that tightened the muscles in my stomach. Vanessa leaned against the wall, scrolling through her phone, humming again. The look on her face was strangely satisfied. That was the moment a whisper of instinct brushed the back of my mind. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for days, but I had been too focused on the ceremony and my recovery to see it clearly. I pushed the thought aside, telling myself stress could turn shadows into threats. Still, the feeling lingered, like a cold palm pressing lightly against the base of my neck. As the elevator opened and we entered the heart of Fort Carson, the unease stayed with me, pulsing quietly beneath every breath. I told myself it was nerves. I told myself the ceremony would remind me I still belonged here. I did not yet understand that the real danger was not behind me in Afghanistan. It was standing right behind my wheelchair. The first small warning arrived the morning after my visit to Fort Carson when I rolled across the living room and felt the wheelchair tilt slightly to the left. It was subtle enough that someone unfamiliar with the chair might not have noticed, but I knew every sound, every shift, every vibration. Recovery had taught me to listen to the chair the way a soldier listens to a rifle. When something is off, it speaks. I parked near the window and ran my fingers along the left wheel. The axle felt warm, which usually meant friction. The brake lever clicked, but in a softer way than usual, a faint, muted sound instead of the firm, mechanical snap I knew by heart. I tested the wheel again, shifting my weight slightly. The chair wobbled, not dramatically, but enough to make my stomach tighten. Vanessa wandered into the room, holding a cup of coffee, the same relaxed expression she always wore when she wanted to appear innocent. She noticed me checking the wheel and sighed dramatically as if I were inconveniencing her by existing. "What now?" she asked. "Something feels loose," I said. "The left wheel keeps dipping." She shrugged, taking a slow sip before responding. "Maybe you are just sitting weird," she said. "Or maybe you finally gained a little weight." That joke hit sharper than she intended. Or maybe exactly as she intended. I ignored her comment and continued checking the bolts. One of them felt slightly out of place, not enough to cause a complete failure, but enough to raise concern. When I pressed gently against it, the metal shifted just a fraction of an inch. Still, she rolled her eyes dismissively. "Seriously, Rowan, the chair is fine. You act like it is some kind of high-tech tank. You roll around and it works. End of story." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something about the wheel lingered in my mind like a whisper refusing to fade. I told myself I was overthinking everything because of the ceremony. I told myself stress could make any small issue look like a threat. Still, the unease stayed with me long after she left the room. Later that afternoon, the second warning arrived when I could not rationalize away. I was on the porch, watering the plants my mother once loved when I heard the familiar creak of the wooden gate. I expected a delivery driver, but instead I saw Mr. Richard Harlan, the elderly neighbor who had lived next door to my mother for nearly 20 years. He wore his usual denim jacket and carried the tired yet kind expression of someone who had seen too much but still cared deeply. "Rowan," he said, his voice low and cautious. "Do you have a minute?" I nodded and he stepped closer, glancing back toward the street before speaking again. "I do not want to worry you, but I figured you should know. I saw someone messing with your wheelchair last night." The words hit me harder than the mountain wind. My fingers tightened on the armrest. Who I asked, though, I already felt the answer forming painfully in my mind. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I could not see clearly," he admitted. "It was dark, but the person went into your garage and stood over your chair for a while. They bent down like they were checking something. Then they left fast." My heart pounded. Did it look like a man or a woman? "Hard to say," he replied. "Looked small maybe, but I do not want to accuse anyone without being sure." I thanked him sincerely, though my voice shook. He patted my shoulder gently. "Your mother would want someone to look out for you," he said. And something about this did not sit right with me. After he left, I sat in silence, letting his words sink in. The garage was locked, or should have been. only two people had the code: me and Vanessa. The thought formed, but I pushed it away too quickly. It felt disloyal, even though logic pointed squarely at her. It could have been a thief, I told myself, or a kid messing around, or Mr. Harlan misinterpreting what he saw. But the doubts returned like a steady drumbeat. The loose bolt, the subtle wobble, the shift in the brake sound, Vanessa's impatience, the bitterness she carried like a personal shadow. For the first time, I allowed myself to ask the question directly. Would she actually harm me? The answer refused to come. When Vanessa returned home that evening, I watched her carefully. She acted normal, cheerful even. She asked what I wanted for dinner. She asked if I was nervous about the ceremony. She asked if I needed help with anything. But her eyes never stayed on mine for long, and each time they drifted away, I felt the bitter echo of Harlan's warning. As she walked past the wheelchair, she nudged it lightly with her foot, almost carelessly. The chair shifted again, that same faint wobble. My breath caught. "Vanessa," I said quietly, "do you know anything about someone being near my chair last night?" She froze for half a second, just long enough for me to feel it. Then she scoffed dramatically, turning toward me. "Seriously, Rowan, who would want to mess with your wheelchair? You think you are that important?" I studied her face. She held her expression steady, but something cold flickered beneath it. Still, I lacked proof, and accusing her outright would only drive her hostility deeper, so I said nothing more. The rest of the evening passed quietly, but my mind was far from calm. Every doubt, every whisper of instinct pulled at the edges of my thoughts. I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe that the girl who grew up beside me, even if reluctantly, would never choose to harm me. But small red flags are never small for long. They stack on top of each other until the weight becomes impossible to ignore. And now, the weight was beginning to crush the last pieces of trust I still held. I did not know it yet, but these early warnings were only the beginning. The real danger was still waiting silently just out of sight, preparing for its moment to strike. The call from my mother's attorney came early in the morning while sunlight barely reached across the kitchen counter. I was pouring coffee slowly, trying not to spill, when my cell phone buzzed against the wooden table. The name on the screen made my breath tighten. Attorney Samuel Groves. The man who had handled my mother's estate 2 years earlier. I answered quickly, balancing the phone between my shoulder and my ear as I steadied my cup. "Staff Sergeant Mercer," he said in his calm, measured voice. "I apologize for the early call, but I have important news." My grip on the cup loosened slightly. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," he replied. "In fact, this should be good news. According to the final stipulation in your mother's will, the full legal transfer of the Colorado Springs house will activate at the conclusion of your recognition ceremony tomorrow." I blinked, staring at the kitchen wall as his words settled slowly into place. "I thought the house was already legally mine." "It is," he clarified, "but there were 2 conditions your mother included. One involved your completion of long-term military service, which you have fulfilled. The second required the formal update from our office after the Army publicly acknowledged your service-related injuries. Once the ceremony is concluded, we will record the transfer within 24 hours. The house will be indisputably yours." My throat tightened unexpectedly, not from the legal news, but from the memory it stirred. My mother sitting on the edge of her bed during her final weeks, holding my hands, the air smelling faintly of lavender and warm blankets. Her voice, soft but firm, saying, "You have given your life to serve this country, Rowan. I want you to have something safe, something no one can take." I thanked Groves, then hung up, resting both hands on the counter. For a few long breaths, I allowed myself to feel something rare. Security. The sense that I had a future anchored in something stable and mine. Then I heard the faint shuffle behind me. Vanessa stood in the hallway, half hidden in the shadow between the kitchen and the living room. She was leaning lightly against the wall, arms crossed, gaze focused not on me, but on the phone I still held. Her expression gave her away. She had heard everything. "Hey," I said cautiously, trying to find neutral ground. "Coffee is still warm if you want some." She stepped fully into the kitchen, her face arranged in a mask that aimed for polite interest but failed to hide the tension in her jaw. "So that was your lawyer," she said casually, though her tone sharpened at the edges. "Something about the house." My stomach dropped. "He was just calling to confirm some paperwork," I replied, unsure how much to reveal. But Vanessa already knew enough, and she was too perceptive to miss the meaning. "The house becomes officially yours tomorrow," she said slowly, each word shaped as if she were testing its taste. That is what I heard. I braced myself. This was the moment where a healthy family might celebrate or express relief or at least say they were glad something good was happening. Instead, Vanessa let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Must be nice," she whispered, "to have everything handed to you in the end." Her words did not strike with the force of anger, but with something heavier, resentment layered with years of bitterness. I did not respond at first. I simply watched her as a dozen memories surfaced uninvited. Christmas mornings where she accused me of being the favorite. Birthdays where she said our mother bought me nicer gifts. Nights after disagreements where she muttered that I had it easier because Mom believed every word I said. And then the memory that hurt the most. The night my mother took my hand the last time she was strong enough to speak clearly. "Rowan," she said, "if anything ever happens to me, do not let anyone take what I left for you. Promise me you will protect it." At the time, I thought she was talking about the emotional meaning of the house, the years of love within its walls. I did not realize she sensed something deeper in Vanessa, a hunger for ownership that ran far beyond grief. Vanessa walked past me now and opened a cabinet, roughly grabbing a glass. The tension radiating from her filled the entire kitchen. I tried to keep my tone calm. "Vanessa, the house is not a prize. It is just a place where Mom wanted me to feel safe. That is all." She set the empty glass on the counter harder than necessary, the noise sharp in the quiet room. "You get safety, you get a future, you get a house," she muttered. "I get what? Memories and a guest room if you feel generous." "That is not fair," I said quietly. "Mom loved us both. She left you plenty in her will. Money she could not take the bitterness anymore. That is not the same, and you know it." She turned to face me, then her eyes bright, not with tears, but with something rawer, emptier. "Mom never loved me the way she loved you. Maybe she did not mean to choose, but she did. And now, even after she is gone, you still get everything." I took a slow breath, wanting to reach her, but unsure whether anything I said would matter. "Vanessa, this house does not change anything between us. We are still family." She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "Family," she repeated as if the word itself were an insult. "You really think that means something?" She did not give me time to answer. Instead, she brushed past me and walked out onto the porch, letting the screen door slam shut behind her. I listened to her footsteps fade until they disappeared entirely into the quiet suburban street. When I finally wheeled myself back toward the living room, her empty glass was still on the counter, a faint ring of water forming beneath it. I stared at it longer than I meant to, recognizing it as a symbol of something no one wants to admit. Sometimes the people closest to you stop seeing what you have survived and only see what you have left. And for Vanessa, the house was no longer just a home. It was a motive, a powerful one. I did not yet understand how dangerous that motive would become, but the shift in her eyes that morning told me everything I needed to know. The ceremony might have been meant to honor my service, but for Vanessa, it marked something far more personal, a deadline. The night before the ceremony unfolded with a stillness that felt unnatural, as if the entire house were holding its breath. I could not sleep. My mind kept replaying the tense conversation about the house and the strange wobble in the wheelchair earlier that week. Eventually, I gave up trying to rest and wheeled myself into the garage where the fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. My chair sat in the center of the room, waiting like a silent witness. I pulled closer and locked the main brake, though even that simple action felt different. Softer, hesitant. Something inside me tightened. I leaned forward and examined the brake assembly, carefully running my fingers along the mechanisms, the bolts, the release lever. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then my thumb brushed against a bolt that moved under the slightest pressure. My breath stopped, The bolt holding the brake bracket was not only loose, it had been intentionally loosened. Not worn from age, not bumped accidentally, loosened. Someone had turned it enough times to weaken the brake's resistance, but not enough to make the sabotage obvious. A cold shiver ran through my entire spine. No one else used this chair. No one else touched it except me and Vanessa. I swallowed hard and tested the right brake just to compare. That bolt was firm exactly the way it should be. The imbalance made the truth clearer than I wanted to admit. My heart pounded with slow, heavy beats as I stared at the loose bolt. I thought about what Mr. Harlan said. I saw someone messing with your wheelchair last night. I thought about the sudden tilt, the wobble, the soft click, the way Vanessa brushed off every concern. For a long moment, I sat completely still, letting the reality settle across me like a winter coat. Someone who knew I depended on this chair had tampered with the one part of it that could protect me from injury. Someone close, someone with access, someone who had everything to gain if something happened to me. I straightened slowly, feeling a surge of anger push through the fear. Fear made people cautious. Anger made them steady. I rolled back inside the house and found Vanessa in the living room painting her nails, the television glowing faintly in front of her. She looked up with a faint smile that did not reach her eyes. "You are awake," she said. "Big day tomorrow." I took a breath, steadying my voice. "Did you touch my wheelchair?" Her eyebrows lifted in exaggerated surprise. "Touch your chair? Why would I?" "Something is wrong with the brakes," I said, keeping my tone controlled. The bolt was loosened. She blinked once, then leaned back into the couch, crossing her legs slowly. "Rowan, you really need to calm down. Sometimes things wear out. You push that chair a lot." That answer angered me more than if she had lied outright. She was minimizing, dismissing, making me doubt what I knew I had seen with my own eyes. "The bolt did not loosen itself," I said. Her expression shifted subtly, a flash of annoyance crossing the surface before she forced it away. She lifted her nail polish brush again, waving dismissively. "If something is wrong, get it fixed. Do not blame me every time the world is not perfect." I stared at her long enough for silence to thicken between us. I wanted to shout, accuse, demand truth, but I could not risk pushing her further into the shadows where she hid her true intentions. The ceremony was tomorrow. I had obligations. I had superiors waiting. I had a role to fulfill not just for myself, but for the soldiers who could not return home as I had. I needed to be there, even if she wanted me gone. So I swallowed the words and nodded slowly. "Fine," I said. "I will handle it." She smirked lightly as if she felt victorious, but I refused to give her power over my reaction. I rolled toward my room, but halfway down the hallway, I stopped. My reflection stared back at me from the glass frame of a photograph hanging on the wall. My mother in her garden arms around both of us, Rowan and Vanessa, smiling for the camera as if the future were guaranteed to be kind. I remembered her voice again. "Do not let anyone take what I left for you." The picture blurred for a moment. I blinked hard and continued toward my room. Once inside, I locked the door, a rare act in my own home, but tonight it felt necessary. I set the wheelchair beside the bed and inspected the bolt again, staring at it until the truth settled like stone. I was not imagining things. I was not being paranoid. Someone wanted the brakes to fail. Someone wanted me vulnerable. Someone wanted me out of the way before the ceremony finalized the house transfer. The thought made my pulse tighten. I felt trapped between two impossible choices. Avoid the ceremony and let fear dictate my life, or attend knowing someone close to me might be planning something worse. But there was never truly a choice. I had fought too hard to reclaim pieces of my life after Afghanistan. I would not let anyone push me into hiding, not even someone who shared my last name. I would attend the ceremony. I would hold my position with dignity, and I would watch my back. As I finally tried to sleep, my mind repeated the same question again and again. If she was capable of loosening a bolt in the dark, what else was she capable of when the stakes grew even higher? I had no answer yet, but morning was coming quickly, and with it the ceremony that would expose everything buried beneath the surface. The morning of the ceremony arrived wrapped in a crisp Colorado chill, the kind that made the mountains beyond Fort Carson glow with pale light. The base had a certain stillness at that hour, a respectful quiet that settled over the parade field and the walkways leading toward the main event hall. Flags rose slowly on their poles, catching the early wind. Soldiers in dress uniforms moved with deliberate steps, creating an atmosphere that felt both ceremonial and deeply personal. I sat in my wheelchair near the entrance, waiting for the final instructions from the coordinators while Vanessa stood a few feet away, scrolling through her phone. She was unusually quiet, not sulking, not openly hostile, just quiet. And that silence felt more dangerous than her sarcasm ever had. I watched her carefully, trying to decipher the expression she tried so hard to hide. She kept glancing toward the side exits, the corners of the building, anywhere except my face. Her hands fiddled with the strap of her purse, tapping, 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 like she was counting time toward something only she knew. A base liaison approached and offered to escort us inside. As he pushed the door open, the rich baritone of General Marcus Elwood's voice spilled into the corridor. He was already speaking to the assembled guests, warming up the crowd with his usual cadence. The man had a voice built for command, deep, steady, composed. Even before we entered, I felt the energy in the room shift. Inside every seat was filled soldiers in uniform, veterans in civilian clothes, Gold Star families, officers, local officials. The air vibrated with a rare mixture of pride, solemnity, and expectation. General Elwood stood at the podium in full dress uniform, ribbons lined across his chest, like a quiet history of every place he had ever carried the weight of command. He was a 4-star general, but more importantly, he was a man who understood the sacrifices of those sitting before him. When he spoke, the hall fell silent. Today, we honor not only service, he said, but the unbroken spirit of those who carried its cost on their bodies and in their lives. The wounded are not defined by limitation. They are defined by perseverance. His words settled deep inside me, warming something that had gone cold in the months since the explosion. I used to stand next to soldiers who believed the same thing, who believed courage was not about charging forward, but about rising again after being broken. As applause filled the room, I glanced sideways. Vanessa's face was expressionless, blank. Her eyes did not follow the general or the soldiers being helped to their seats or the large banner hanging overhead. Instead, she watched the aisle behind us, her gaze narrowing slightly every time someone walked past. She looked like a person waiting not for a ceremony to begin, but for an opportunity to appear. The coordinator leaned toward me and whispered, "It will be your turn to move forward in about 15 minutes. If you need anything, just let one of the MPs know." I nodded while my pulse fluttered hard under my ribs. The loose brake bolt weighed heavily in my mind, the same way a misfiring weapon gnaws at a soldier before a mission. I spotted 2 military police officers stationed near the side entrance. One stood tall and alert. The other checked his radio periodically. I motioned to them, and one approached quickly, his expression respectful. "Morning, Staff Sergeant," he said. "What can I do for you?" I lowered my voice. "I need someone to check my chair. The brake feels off, the left side especially." He crouched and examined the wheel, briefly tightening the lever, testing the roll. "You were right," he said. "Something does feel off. Let me grab my toolkit." Before he could stand fully, his radio crackled loudly with a clipped, urgent transmission. "Unit Bravo 7, report to the west entrance immediately. Possible disturbance." The MP straightened instantly, instinct overriding everything. "Sorry, Staff Sergeant. I need to respond to this. I will be back as soon as I can." He hurried away, both MPs following the call down the hallway at a quick stride. I watched them go, a sinking feeling forming low in my stomach. The timing felt too precise, too convenient. Vanessa shifted behind me. When I turned, she offered a thin smile, one meant to appear supportive, but sharpened by the quiet tension in her eyes. "Everything okay?" she asked. The question sounded normal, but her tone carried a brittle edge. I forced a steady breath. "Just having the chair looked at, that is all." She nodded once, but her gaze flicked briefly toward the door, the same door the MPs had rushed through. Something tightened behind her expression, something she tried to bury quickly. The ceremony continued, moving forward around us as if nothing were amiss. Rows of uniformed officers stood to honor another veteran being escorted onto the stage. A choir of children from a local school began singing America the Beautiful, their voices high and clear, drifting across the vast hall like a fragile thread of hope. But beneath all that beauty, the uneasy tension inside my chest kept growing. I felt the faint shift in the wheelchair frame again, a tremor so small it could have been overlooked if not for the nights I had spent memorizing every sound the chair made. Vanessa moved closer, placing her hands lightly on the handles. "Do not worry," she whispered. "I will take care of you." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they pressed ice against the back of my neck. Because nothing about her tone promised care. It promised intention. It promised control. And with the MPs called away and the ceremony heightening around us, I realized something dangerous. I was in the most honored room on base, surrounded by soldiers and officers, yet I had never felt more unprotected in my life. The moment Vanessa suggested we step outside for a breath of fresh air, I felt the first quiet alarm bell ring somewhere deep in my spine. The ceremony was minutes from calling my name. Cameras were being set up. Officers were taking their seats. The hall was growing quieter as General Elwood prepared to continue his remarks. Yet Vanessa leaned down with a practiced smile and whispered, "You look tense. Let us go out back for a moment before your big entrance." Something inside me braced hard, but there was no polite way to refuse without creating a scene. And the last thing I wanted was to draw unwanted attention or appear unstable in front of the soldiers who had come to honor us. So I nodded slowly, letting her guide the wheelchair toward the side exit. The heavy metal door opened with a long groan, letting in a blast of cold Colorado air. The sunlight outside was sharp and high, and the mountains in the distance sat like silent witnesses. Behind the hall stretched the concrete loading slope that supply teams used for transporting crates and equipment. It was a long descending path, smooth but steep enough that anyone in a wheelchair needed full control of their brakes. I had rolled across it a few times during recovery sessions months ago, always slowly, always with caution. Today, the breeze carried a strange heaviness as if the air itself were waiting. Vanessa rolled me all the way to the top of the slope, then stopped abruptly. The sudden halt made the chair lurch forward slightly, and my hand went automatically to the brake lever. It clicked, but nothing tightened beneath me. The chair still rolled the slightest bit. My stomach dropped. I pulled the lever harder. The brake did not engage. My pulse spiked instantly. This was not a malfunction. This was the moment the loose bolt had been preparing for. I turned my head sharply. Vanessa stood behind me, her face illuminated by the cold morning sun. No forced smile, no sarcastic smirk, just a calm, almost peaceful expression that stopped my breath. "Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The brake is not catching." She tilted her head gently as though observing something trivial. "Maybe you pushed too hard," she replied. "You know how these chairs get." I shook my head. "No, something is wrong. We need to go back inside. Now!" She placed both hands on the wheelchair handles, gripping them with deliberate, slow pressure, the same way someone grips a lever they intend to pull. Her voice softened into something that made my blood surge with fear. "Mom left everything to you." Her tone held no pain, no grief, just cold calculation. But not for long. I tried to twist my body to reach the wheel edges, but before I could center my weight, her hands shoved forward with a force that stole the breath right out of my lungs. The chair shot forward. Not a roll, a launch. The slope yawned open beneath me like the mouth of a canyon, and the wheels clattered against the concrete, picking up speed faster than I had time to react. Wind slapped my face as the chair accelerated. I clawed at the rims, trying to slow the descent, but my palms slipped. The brake lever hung useless, the metal vibrating against my fingers. My breath tore out in shards as panic flooded every nerve. The hall faded behind me. The world became motion-speed gravity. The slope was longer than I remembered, the descent crueler than I had ever imagined. At the top of the hill, Vanessa remained perfectly still, a shadow against the sun. For a split second, our eyes locked. Hers held no regret, only certainty. I tried to drag my hands again along the wheels, forcing every ounce of strength into slowing myself, but the angle was too steep, the momentum too strong. The chair jittered violently, threatening to tip. My heart hammered against my ribs, the beat loud enough to drown out the whistle of the wind. A few more seconds, and I would hit the bottom with crushing force. The edge of the slope approached the flat concrete of the parking area, where the impact would be brutal, unforgiving. My breath broke. My vision shook. I knew exactly what Vanessa had intended. And she had chosen the perfect moment when MPs were away, when the ceremony had everyone distracted, when I was isolated just far enough from the door that no one inside could hear a cry for help. I felt the front wheels lift ever so slightly from the speed, and a wave of helpless terror surged through me. I had been in danger before overseas, real danger created by enemies who did not know my name. But this was different. This was betrayal sharpened into a weapon. The concrete blurred beneath me so fast my eyes struggled to focus. My body curled instinctively, bracing for the moment gravity would take complete control and smash me against the ground. I screamed out her name once, but the wind swallowed the sound the way darkness swallows flame. At the top of the slope, Vanessa shaded her eyes with her hand, watching almost serenely, as if admiring a predictable outcome. For a heartbeat, time slowed. The wheels wobbled, the chair, jolted the bottom of the slope, drew closer, and the full, horrifying truth settled in my bones. I was not going to stop. I was not going to slow. And no one knew I was out here. Just as the final drop approached, the world seemed to pull tight around me, every sound amplifying the clatter, the scrape, the hiss of rubber on concrete. My hands burned. My throat tightened. My mind screamed one thing: this cannot be the end. Then the chair bucked violently as it hit the steepest point, the sudden jolt throwing my weight forward. I felt myself lifting slightly from the seat, no control, no leverage. The world tilted, the sound blurred, and in the final instant before the drop claimed me, a single thought cut through the chaos like a blade of light. This was no accident. This was the moment Vanessa had waited for all along. The wheels lost traction. My body pitched forward, and I began to fall. The moment I began to fall, time seemed to stretch into a thin, trembling thread. My wheelchair hurtled down the last stretch of the concrete slope, and my heart pounded with such force I could hear nothing else, until a sharp, commanding voice cut through the chaos like a blast of thunder. "Stop that chair now!" The roar was unmistakable. A 4-star general did not shout often, but when he did, it carried the full authority of a lifetime in uniform. General Marcus Elwood had stepped out behind the hall to review his speaking notes before returning to the stage. He had expected a quiet moment. Instead, he found himself staring at a soldier in a wheelchair, accelerating uncontrollably down the loading ramp. For a split second, he froze, analyzing the scene with the rapid precision only a seasoned commander possessed. The slope, the speed, the angle, the woman standing at the top, watching with eerie stillness, and the trajectory that would send me slamming into the concrete lot at unforgiving force. In less than a heartbeat, he understood exactly what was happening. This was deliberate. He sprinted forward with surprising speed for a man of his age, shouting for military police before his boots even hit the pavement. "MP, move! Move now!" His voice boomed across the back lot, shaking the air. A pair of MPs, exiting a side utility building, immediately snapped into motion. One ran toward the bottom of the slope. The other ran toward the midpoint, hoping to intercept my descent before my chair gained enough momentum to overturn. I had no control left. The wind stung my eyes, and the wheels vibrated dangerously as the slope flattened slightly, then dipped again. My hands slipped again on the rims, offering no resistance. Panic surged, but I could barely breathe, let alone scream. My mind reeled. This could not be real. Not here. Not today. Not at a ceremony meant to honor the wounded. Then through the vibrating haze of motion, I saw two shapes charging forward. One MP lunged from the side, planting himself directly in my path, bracing for impact. The other sprinted behind him, ready to stabilize. My chair slammed into the first MP's boots, and momentum shoved him backward, but he held firm, gripping the armrests with both hands. Another violent jolt rocked the frame as the second MP grabbed the rear handles, locking the wheels with his body weight. The world lurched to a stop so sudden it rattled my teeth. I gasped, sucking in cold air as my heart hammered like it might break through my ribs. The MPs steadied me, checking quickly for injuries. "Are you hurt, Staff Sergeant? Can you hear me?" I nodded, breathless, still clinging to the armrests, as if the ground itself might drop out beneath me again. At the top of the slope, Vanessa reacted only when she realized the attempt had failed. Her hands flew to her mouth in an exaggerated gesture of horror. She shouted so loudly her voice cracked. She slipped. She slipped. I tried to help her. She lost control. The lie tasted like ash even from where I sat. The general who had witnessed everything strode toward her with a look that could shatter steel. He approached with deliberate, unyielding steps, every inch of him radiating fury restrained only by discipline. Sergeant Major, he barked toward one of the aides nearby. "Secure the scene and alert CID immediately. The ceremony is on hold until further notice." Inside the building, the audience shifted uneasily. Murmurs rippled across the hall as the scheduled program abruptly paused. Soldiers exchanged looks. Families whispered. Something serious was happening, and the atmosphere changed instantly. No one ignored a disruption involving military police, and certainly not one triggered by a 4-star general's order. General Elwood reached the top of the slope facing Vanessa directly. His shadow nearly engulfed her. She stumbled back as if his presence alone pushed her off balance. "Sir," she stammered. "I was trying to help. She just rolled." The general's eyes narrowed. His voice dropped lower, colder, every syllable precise. "I watched you push that chair. I watched you look down that slope before you touched it. Do not insult my intelligence or hers." Vanessa's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, searching for another lie, but the general lifted one hand, silencing her instantly. That security camera saw everything he said, pointing toward the corner of the building where a mounted camera angled directly at the slope. Every eye followed his gesture. Vanessa's lips trembled. She blinked rapidly as if trying to calculate whether the footage could somehow be interpreted differently, but her panic showed in her tightening jaw. One of the MPs leaned toward the general. "Sir, the recording is active. We can pull the last 10 minutes on the spot." The general nodded once. "Do it." Another MP approached Vanessa while the first examined the wheelchair brakes. "Sir," he called out, "the brake lever is functioning, but the mounting bolt has been tampered with." This was intentional. The words hit the air like a detonation. Intentional. Not an accident, not neglect. Intentional. Vanessa swayed slightly, her face contorting between denial and the sinking realization that she was surrounded by trained investigators who had seen every type of crime the military world could present. Sir Vanessa said, her voice cracking. "I swear I did not." She started, but the general cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Not another word. You will sit this out until CID arrives." He turned to the MPs. "Escort her to the holding room and keep her separated. No communication without CID authorization." As they took her by the elbows, Vanessa twisted, looking directly at me for the first time since the attempt. Her eyes were wild and accusing, as if I had wronged her by surviving. I felt a sharp shiver run through my chest. Even in that moment, she did not look sorry. She looked furious that her plan had failed. The MPs brought my wheelchair onto level ground, checking again for injuries. I shook my head slowly, still breathless but steady enough to speak. "Thank you," I whispered. One MP nodded firmly. "We have you now, Staff Sergeant. You are safe." In that moment, though, surrounded by soldiers and authority figures, I could still feel the ghost of the slope beneath me, that terrible sensation of helpless motion. The ceremony inside had stopped. The atmosphere across the base shifted into something heavy and electric. And as General Elwood turned back toward me, expression stern yet protective, I felt the weight of his presence anchor me to the earth again. Nothing about today would continue as planned. Everything had changed in the span of seconds. Can you imagine hearing a 4-star general shout for your life? The moment CID arrived, the atmosphere around the loading bay shifted from shock to something sharper, colder, and unmistakably procedural. Criminal Investigation Division agents moved with quiet precision, their presence cutting through the lingering chaos. They spoke little at first, surveying the slope, photographing the brake assembly marking the ground where my wheelchair had skidded. Every gesture was calm, practiced, professional, yet the weight of their attention made everything feel brutally real. One agent, a tall woman with clipped speech patterns and steady eyes, approached me. "Staff Sergeant Mercer. I am Special Agent Lydia Cross. We are going to ask you a few questions, but for now, I need to confirm, did you feel any control of the wheelchair at the time of descent?" I swallowed hard. No. The brake did not catch. The lever clicked, but nothing engaged. She nodded, taking notes. "Did the wheelchair exhibit problems prior to this morning?" I hesitated only for a moment before answering. "Yes, I noticed irregularities earlier this week. A loose bolt, a small wobble. I tightened what I could, but this morning it slipped completely." Agent Cross glanced toward another CID agent inspecting the brake bracket. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes told the truth. This had been tampered with, deliberately. They brought me a blanket as the wind cut across my shoulders, then rolled me closer to the building wall to shield me from the cold. The chair rattled softly underneath me, a reminder of how close it had come to ending everything. I forced myself to breathe steadily, slow, controlled, the way I learned during recovery sessions. Across the slope, an MP escorted Vanessa toward a temporary holding area, though her shrill voice carried across the pavement long before she came into view. "I swear I did not push her like that." She slipped. "It was an accident." Another voice CID's cut her off. "Ma'am, you need to wait. We will speak with you shortly." When Vanessa realized I was within view, her face transformed. The tears came instantly, big, dramatic, heaving sobs that made her look like she was collapsing under grief instead of guilt. "Rowan," she cried out. Tell them I did not mean for anything to happen. Please." I met her eyes but said nothing. I had spent years giving her grace where she gave me disdain. Today, she would not receive that mercy. CID led her into a small administrative room off the side corridor. The door shut behind her, muffling the sobs, though not completely. Agents approached the security office near the parking structure. Within minutes, they retrieved footage from the camera that General Elwood had identified. A laptop was set on the hood of a patrol vehicle, and several CID agents gathered around it. I watched from a distance, heart pounding again for reasons far different than the slope. The recording began. There I was, sitting in my chair near the doorway as Vanessa positioned herself behind me. She looked around sharply, scanning the area for witnesses. She stepped behind the wheelchair, crouched low, and touched the brake assembly. My stomach knotted violently. She turned the bolt, twice, maybe 3 times. Then she stood, brushed off her hands, and placed a serene smile on her face. She leaned down, whispering something into my ear. The footage did not capture sound, but I knew exactly what she had said. "You do not need this ceremony or the house. Not for long." Then the push. Hard. Unmistakable. The chair jerked. The wheels rolled. My descent began. The camera caught every second of it. There was no blur, no doubt, no room for interpretation. A breath escaped me somewhere between relief and heartbreak. CID replayed the footage twice. The third time, they zoomed in, isolating the moment her hands touched the brake mount. Agent Cross wrote something quickly in her notebook, then approached me again. "Staff Sergeant, the evidence is clear. This was intentional. We will move forward accordingly." Intentional. Hearing the word out loud made something inside me crack. Not a loud break, but a quiet, devastating one. Someone I grew up with. Someone who attended holidays with me. Someone who shared my mother's last name. She had not just wished harm on me. She had engineered it. Agent Cross placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. "You are safe now. We will handle the rest." She meant it, but the safety felt thin, fragile, like I could still feel the slope beneath me. They brought Vanessa out moments later, her wrists not cuffed yet, but her posture stiffening when she saw the agent's expressions. Special Agent Cross addressed her calmly. "Ma'am, we reviewed the footage." Vanessa's face drained to white. "What footage?" "The one showing you manipulating the brake assembly." Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed, panic clawing across her features. She shifted strategies instantly, tears flooding back into her eyes, shoulders shaking. She began to sob loudly, almost theatrically. "You do not understand," she wailed. She deserved it. She always deserved it. Mom loved her more. Mom gave her everything. She never gave me anything. It spilled out of her like a confession. Not regret, not apology, just years of resentment dressed as justification. I flinched at the words. Even after everything, hearing her say them felt like being struck across the heart. The people nearby went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Vanessa cried harder. All my life she got everything. I only wanted what was supposed to be mine. CID agents exchanged glances. This was not a woman fighting for innocence. This was someone revealing her motive. Clear, potent, damning. Agent Cross lifted a hand. "Ma'am, please stop talking. You have the right to remain silent." Vanessa broke into hysterics as MPs escorted her farther into the building, her voice echoing down the hallway. "I hate her! I hate her! She ruined everything!" Each word hit with a painful clarity, yet I felt strangely hollow, like the impact from the slope had landed somewhere inside my chest instead. The adrenaline faded and a throb spread through my ribs, my shoulder, the muscles strained from trying to control the fall. Physical pain I could manage. I had managed worse overseas, but the betrayal, the deliberate cruelty, the knowledge that someone in my own family had calculated my absence as a solution to her jealousy. That was a wound no medic could bandage. An MP knelt beside me. "Staff Sergeant, we are taking you to medical for a full checkup. You do not need to give any more statements today." As they wheeled me back toward the main hall, the ceremony lights inside flickered against the floor. The place that was meant to honor resilience now held the aftermath of a crime. My crime. My family's betrayal. Have you ever watched someone reveal who they truly are and felt your entire world shift around you? They took me into a quiet conference room inside the administrative wing of the hall while medical staff checked my vitals and examined the strain in my arms and shoulders. The fluorescent lighting hummed faintly overhead, and every sound felt too sharp, too close, as if my senses were still bracing for impact. I should have felt relief. I should have felt safe now that Vanessa was in custody and CID had gathered the initial evidence. But instead, I felt a hollow ache spreading through my chest, an ache made of questions that had long gone unanswered. Betrayal never came from strangers. It came from people who knew where your deepest fractures were. And Vanessa had always known mine. I was speaking quietly with Agent Cross when a knock came at the door. An MP opened it and ushered in a familiar figure, Richard Harlan, the elderly neighbor who had lived next door to my mother for more than 20 years. His silver hair was flattened by the wind, and he clutched a folder to his chest as if it were something fragile and dangerous. When he saw me, his expression twisted with concern. "Rowan, dear, are you all right?" I nodded, though the answer was much more complicated than that. Mr. Harlan stepped inside, slowly lowering himself into a seat beside me. He looked as though he had aged 10 years since the last time I saw him only a week earlier. Agent Cross greeted him formally. "Sir, you came forward with information earlier. You mentioned you saw someone tampering with Staff Sergeant Mercer's wheelchair." He tightened his grip on the folder. "Yes, and I did not realize how serious it was until now." He looked at me, then guilt clouding his eyes. I should have said something sooner. I shook my head gently. "No, Mr. Harlan. You're here now. That's what matters." He exhaled shakily. "Last night, well, technically early this morning, around 1, Vanessa was in your garage. I only saw her silhouette at first. She was crouched near your wheelchair. She left quickly when she noticed the porch light flick on. I thought maybe she was adjusting something for you." "I never imagined—" His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and handed the folder to Agent Cross. "I printed these because I thought they might matter. I found them this morning on the shared Wi-Fi logs when I was helping my grandson reset your mother's old router. It seems Vanessa used the network last night." Agent Cross opened the folder. Inside were screenshots messages from Vanessa to an unknown friend time-stamped at 12:47 a.m. The first one read, "Tomorrow, everything becomes mine." Another, Once the ceremony is done, the house will finally be settled. I just need her out of the way. A third. She's too weak now. She can't fight anything I do. My throat tightened painfully. Even though I had suspected her motives, seeing them spelled out in her own words hit like a fresh blow. Vanessa had not acted on impulse. She had planned every step with chilling clarity. Agent Cross studied the pages, her jaw setting into a rigid line. She turned to me. "Staff Sergeant, did you ever have conflicts with your stepsister regarding your mother's estate?" I laughed bitterly under my breath. Conflict implies both sides are fighting. She was fighting. I was trying to survive it. Cross nodded. "Tell me what you mean." I closed my eyes for a moment as memories I had tried to bury resurfaced one by one. Ever since we were teenagers, Vanessa carried resentment like it was part of her blood. She hated that my mom treated us equally. She hated that teachers liked me. She hated that I enlisted because it meant people respected me. After the blast in Afghanistan when I came home injured, she shifted. The resentment got sharper, more focused. I swallowed. She used to hint that I didn't deserve the house, that she had sacrificed more. But our mother made her intentions clear. She wanted me to have a place to rebuild my life, to heal. Mr. Harlan nodded sadly. "I remember your mother saying that. She said she trusted you to use it wisely." Vanessa overheard. She didn't take it well. The room filled with a heavy silence. Agent Cross tapped the edge of the folder thoughtfully. "This is no longer just motive. It establishes pattern intent and long-term hostility." She turned to Mr. Harlan. "Sir, your statement is extremely important. Are you willing to sign an official affidavit?" He nodded without hesitation. "Anything to protect Rowan. Anything." His voice wavered, but there was a resolve in his posture that made my chest ache with gratitude. When he left the room, I felt something shift inside me. A truth I had avoided for years was finally rising to the surface. Vanessa hadn't become toxic after the injury or after the inheritance. She had always been this way. She had simply run out of ways to hide it. Agent Cross sat beside me, then not interrogating, not analyzing, but speaking plainly. "You've endured a long-term pattern of emotional abuse, Staff Sergeant. Today was just the first time it crossed into physical action. You need to understand that none of this is your fault." The words landed with unexpected force. My injuries from the fall attempt hurt. My muscles trembled. But the deeper pain came from realizing how many years I had tried to give loyalty to someone who weaponized every bit of it. I looked toward the window where sunlight spilled across the conference table. A few hours earlier, I had come to Fort Carson for honor recognition and closure after months of recovery. Instead, I faced the truth of a family wound far older than any IED blast. And in a strange way, finally seeing it clearly brought its own kind of relief. The lies were over. The mask was gone. The world finally saw Vanessa as she truly was. And now, finally, the investigation would too. The next morning, Fort Carson felt different. The air was sharper, the wind colder, and the hallways strangely quiet, as if the entire installation were waiting for something. I had barely slept, my mind running in loops through the events of the previous day, through the weight of betrayal and the relentless replay of that moment when my wheelchair began sliding beyond my control. Vanessa had been held in a secure room overnight, and CID had spent hours reviewing footage, witness statements, and digital evidence. By sunrise, the truth was overwhelming, undeniable, and ready to be brought into the light. Just after 8, an MP came to escort me to the conference hall where the ceremony had originally been scheduled to resume. Instead of the polished decorations and warm lighting meant for a celebration, the space was now filled with soldiers in uniform, their posture rigid and their expressions solemn. Rows of chairs extended across the room, and military families sat together murmuring quietly. I was rolled to the front near the stage where General Marcus Elwood stood speaking with CID agents. When he turned and saw me, his expression softened, but his eyes still held the controlled fire of a man ready to confront something deeply unjust. "Staff Sergeant Mercer," he said, placing a firm, reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Thank you for being here." I nodded. I wanted to be present. I needed to be. He stepped forward, his voice rising with the authority only a 4-star general could command. Ladies and gentlemen, soldiers and families, we are gathered here today not for the ceremony we planned, but for the truth this installation deserves to witness." The room fell silent. He gestured to an MP near the back. "Bring her in." The doors opened and Vanessa was escorted inside. Her wrists were not cuffed, but two MPs walked beside her. Her eyes darted wildly across the room, scanning for sympathy that did not exist. When she saw me in my wheelchair near the front, her face twisted into something between hatred and desperation. She opened her mouth to speak, but General Elwood raised a hand sharply. "Let us speak with evidence today. No excuses, no distortions, just the truth." He nodded toward the technician stationed beside a large screen. "Play the footage." The hall darkened slightly as the video began. The first frames showed the back loading ramp of the ceremony hall. The timestamp blinked clearly in the corner. Cameras were angled toward the concrete slope, the storage doors, and the shadows collecting near the edges of the building. Vanessa appeared on screen, pushing my wheelchair out onto the ramp. The gasps began immediately. She looked composed, smiling faintly, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. She knelt beside the wheelchair, pretending to adjust the footrest. The camera zoomed in automatically as the motion sensor tightened its frame. Every person in that hall saw it, her hand gripping the brake mechanism, twisting the screws loose with deliberate, practiced movements. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "That's sabotage." Another voice said softly, "My God." The footage continued. Vanessa stood, smoothed her hair, and leaned down to whisper something into my ear. The audio was faint, but clear enough. "Mom left everything to you, but not for long." My stomach knotted hearing it again, but I didn't look away. I wanted every person in that room to understand. The video shifted to the moment she shoved the chair. The hall erupted with horrified sounds, gasps, and shouts as my wheelchair lurched forward, the wheels spinning helplessly, my hands gripping the sides, the slope dragging me downward. Then came the recording of General Elwood's voice shouting for the MPs. The footage froze on the moment he intercepted the fall, stopping the chair before it gained full momentum. The screen went black and the lights rose slowly. Silence filled the room, dense and electric. Vanessa's face had turned chalk white. She shook her head desperately. "No, no, it wasn't like that. You don't understand. You are twisting everything." She pointed at me, her voice cracking into a scream. "She stole everything from me, everything. She took Mom's house, Mom's attention, every bit of respect I ever could have had. You all think she's some hero, but she's nothing. She's weak. She's always been weak." The crowd reacted instantly, a wave of disapproval rolling through the room. Soldiers who had served in combat deployments stared at her with disbelief. Military spouses clasped their hands to their mouths. Some shook their heads in disgust. Vanessa kept spiraling. Tears streamed down her face as she shouted, "She ruined my life. She does not deserve anything. Not the ceremony, not the house, not even your pity." I sat motionless, not because I lacked emotion, but because for the first time in my life I didn't need to defend myself. The truth had spoken for me. General Elwood stepped forward, his voice thundering with controlled authority. "That woman you tried to hurt served her country with courage. She faced danger most people cannot imagine, and while she fought overseas, you fought her at home with cruelty and deception." His voice deepened. "You did not just betray your stepsister. You betrayed the dignity of this entire community." The audience erupted in a standing ovation. The sound was enormous, shaking the air itself. And there I was, sitting in my wheelchair, overwhelmed, breath caught in my throat. For years, I had been dismissed, questioned, doubted. But in that moment, surrounded by soldiers and families and one powerful general, I felt something shift inside me. I felt seen. I felt believed. And I felt stronger than I had since the day of the blast in Afghanistan. Vanessa collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. MPs approached to escort her out, and she did not resist. As they walked her toward the door, she turned once more toward me, eyes burning with a mixture of blame and despair. "You took everything from me. I held her gaze steadily, my voice calm and unwavering. "No, you destroyed yourself." She screamed again as she was led out, but her voice faded behind the closing doors. The room stayed silent for a moment longer. Then General Elwood stepped beside me and said quietly, "This is your moment, Staff Sergeant. Your truth, not hers. Have you ever wished the truth would finally come out publicly?" The hours after the public exposure felt strangely quiet, as if my body and mind were suspended between two worlds, the life I had barely survived and the life I was still learning how to reclaim. But the world outside the walls of Fort Carson did not stay silent for long. By the next morning, Colorado Springs Police Department detectives arrived on base alongside CID officers. Their presence shifted everything. This was no longer a military-adjacent disciplinary matter. This was an active criminal case with real consequences, real statutes, and no room for the family excuses Vanessa had hidden behind for years. I was interviewed first. The detectives asked clear, methodical questions, their voices steady in a way that made it easier for me to recount the events without feeling like I would unravel again. I told them everything from the early signs on my wheelchair to Vanessa's whispered threats to the moment the brakes failed completely. When they asked whether I had any doubt this was intentional, my answer came out sharp, firm, and without hesitation. None. Not anymore. They nodded as if confirming something they had already begun to see too. The camera footage alone was damning. The brake mechanism loosened deliberately, the angle of the push, the threat she whispered, and the fact that she stood back afterward instead of calling for help or trying to stop the descent. In Colorado, intent could be built from behavior, and Vanessa's behavior was intent crystallized. By noon, she was formally arrested on multiple charges: felony assault, attempted homicide, reckless endangerment, and tampering with mobility equipment resulting in bodily harm. The booking process happened off base at the El Paso County Jail. I didn't see it, but the detectives later mentioned she cried halfway through, then shifted to furious denial, then back to sobbing. A cycle I knew too well. When I asked whether she had requested legal counsel, they said she demanded 3 different attorneys before finally settling on one who would accept her case. I felt no satisfaction hearing it. Only a heavy kind of closure settling over my chest. My medical treatment resumed almost immediately. The fall attempt had strained my lower back and torn scar tissue from my previous surgeries. The Army medical team ran scans confirming inflammation along the lumbar region and micro tears in the connective tissue. Pain flared sharply whenever I twisted or tried to bend forward. Despite everything, I felt stronger than I expected. Something inside me felt steadier, as if surviving Vanessa's attack had forced my mind to build a new foundation where fear no longer dictated the terms. During physical therapy sessions at the Evans Army Community Hospital, several nurses approached me softly saying things like, "You handled yourself with strength," or "We're all rooting for you." Soldiers occasionally nodded at me in the hallway, a quiet acknowledgement, a kind of respect I never asked for but deeply felt. As days passed, CID provided updates on the ongoing coordination with Colorado Springs PD. The prosecution had substantial evidence, but wanted additional statements from witnesses, including the MP who first ran toward the slope when General Elwood shouted. The MP confirmed that Vanessa stood motionless, making no attempt to intervene. Her hands were in her pockets, her posture relaxed. That detail alone strengthened the case. Meanwhile, General Elwood asked to meet with me privately. The request came through a staff sergeant who approached my hospital room politely. "Ma'am, the general wanted me to extend an invitation if you feel up to it." I did. When Elwood walked in, he carried the same commanding presence he had shown on the slope. Yet his expression was gentler, the weight of responsibility clear in the lines around his eyes. "Staff Sergeant Mercer," he said, taking a seat beside my wheelchair. "I want you to know that what happened to you will not be quietly dismissed. You deserve transparency. You deserve justice." His words landed with unexpected warmth. For a moment, I didn't have anything to respond with. He continued, "I've reviewed your service record, your deployments, your commendations, your conduct. You've served with integrity and courage for over a decade, and you have continued to show that same courage even after your injury." He paused, letting the significance linger. Because of that, I am submitting your name for an additional commendation, recognizing your resilience and contributions across your years of service." I stared at him stunned. "General, I do not know what to say." "You do not need to say anything," he replied simply. "Strength speaks for itself." After he left, I sat in my room feeling a rare sense of stillness. I had come to Fort Carson for a ceremony that nearly ended my life. Now that same base was becoming the place where my voice was finally being defended, rather than silenced. Meanwhile, the legal system moved quickly. Within 48 hours, Vanessa appeared in court for her first advisement hearing. She wore a jail-issued jumpsuit and her eyes were swollen either from crying or lack of sleep, or both. The judge read the charges aloud. Attempted homicide carried the possibility of decades in prison. When asked whether she understood the charges, she whispered something barely audible. The courtroom transcript later recorded it as, "Yes, Your Honor." Her attorney requested bail. The prosecutor immediately objected, citing risk to the victim, clear intent, and overwhelming digital evidence. Bail was denied. Vanessa was remanded back into custody. That night, lying in my hospital bed unable to sleep, I stared at the faint reflection of the window and wondered how everything in my life had pivoted so sharply in less than 72 hours. Part of me still struggled to understand how family could unravel into something so violent. Another part of me finally accepted that family does not excuse harm. Love does not excuse sabotage. Shared history does not excuse attempted destruction. What Vanessa had done was a crime. What was happening now was justice. And justice moved forward regardless of last names. As the legal proceedings expanded, military leadership reached out again. This time, it was the senior enlisted advisor for the installation who visited to inform me that the Army was considering an additional service ribbon recognizing my dedication and perseverance during recovery. It was more than symbolic. It was validation that my years of service had not been erased by injury or overshadowed by betrayal. As the sun set over the mountains beyond Fort Carson, I felt something unfamiliar blooming slowly inside me. Not happiness exactly, not relief, but a quiet sense of reclaiming. My life had been pushed downhill, but I had not stayed there. I had endured. I had been believed. And now, for the first time in a long time, justice was walking toward me rather than away. 6 months passed both quickly and unbearably slowly. The criminal proceedings continued moving through the system with the deliberate pace of the courts and the relentless steadiness of military documentation. My own life began to settle into something that resembled stability. I was still attending physical therapy twice a week, still navigating pain, still adjusting to a future that looked nothing like the one I had imagined before the blast in Afghanistan. But at least the chaos had quieted. At least the danger had stopped. Or so I thought. It was a gray morning in early November when the letter arrived. I recognized the source before I even touched the envelope. The return address was printed in small block letters from the El Paso County Detention Facility. My heart gave a single, heavy thud. I sat in my kitchen staring at it, unsure whether to open it or burn it unread. Curiosity won, but only barely. The letter inside was written in Vanessa's handwriting, though shakier than I remembered. Words leaned unevenly across the page, pressing hard into the paper, as if desperation alone held them there. "Rowan, I need your help. Please. I cannot do this anymore. Only you can fix this. It is too much. I am not strong enough. I never was." I read the lines, twice numb at first, then incredulous. The tone was not remorseful, not reflective. It was panicked, fearful, and deeply manipulative in the same way she had always spoken when she wanted something. She continued, "I know you are angry. I know you think I meant to hurt you. I was not thinking right. I was overwhelmed. I made mistakes. But you have to understand I need you. You are the only family I have left who can save me, the only one who ever could. Please visit me. I cannot stay here. I can fix this if you help me. You know deep down we are still sisters." I stopped reading. The rest of the page blurred together into an incoherent plea. "Still sisters." The phrase echoed inside me in a way that made my stomach turn. She had tried to push me down a concrete slope with loosened brakes. She had whispered that my life did not matter as long as she got the house. She had stood still and silent while I rolled toward something that could have killed me, and now she was asking for help because the consequences finally frightened her. I folded the letter slowly, deliberately, and placed it on the table. I breathed once, twice, letting the quiet fill the room again. Then I pulled out a pen and a blank sheet of paper. I knew exactly what I would write. My response was short, almost painfully simple. Some doors stay closed for a reason. I signed my name. No explanations, no apologies, no emotional cushioning. I sealed it and placed it in my outgoing mailbox. It felt like closing a chapter with a single calm exhale. Days later, I received word from the jail that Vanessa had requested to add me to her visitation list. I declined. They asked again after she filed a second request. Again, I said no. The third request came accompanied by a note from a jail counselor saying that Vanessa was experiencing emotional distress and believed I was the only person who could calm her. I declined for the third time. My decision did not change. It would never change. I was not her safety net anymore. I had never truly been one in the first place. 10 days after my final refusal, I received a call from the facility. The counselor spoke gently but directly. "Miss Mercer, I just wanted to let you know that Vanessa is having a difficult adjustment period. She seems distraught that you do not wish to meet. She said she expected you to forgive her quickly." Forgive her quickly. The words made something inside me go silent. Not angry, not hurt, just quiet. That kind of quiet that comes when the truth settles so deeply nothing can shake it loose. After the call, I set my phone down on the counter and looked toward the window where the Colorado mountains stretched across the horizon. Snow had begun to gather on the peaks, forming a pale stillness that felt like clarity. Forgiveness was not owed. Closure was not obligation. Healing did not require inviting the person who harmed you back into your life. Vanessa had mistaken accountability for cruelty. She had mistaken consequences for betrayal. She had mistaken my silence for an opening. But the truth was simple. I felt nothing toward her anymore. No lingering rage. No desire for retaliation. Just distance. Necessary distance. The kind that allowed breathing room after years lived under psychological weight. A week later, another letter came from the jail. I returned it to sender without opening it. For the first time in my life, I felt in control of a boundary. People often talk about strength as something loud, battlefield strength, physical strength, the kind measured in weight or distance or scars. But sometimes strength is quiet, like saying no without raising your voice or walking away from a relationship that never cared whether you survived. In December, I learned through my victim advocate that Vanessa had broken down during a counseling session. She reportedly sobbed uncontrollably, saying, "Rowan is all I have. If she does not help me, then no one will." But that was never true. She had always had choices. Different choices. Better ones. Instead, she had chosen resentment over compassion, entitlement over effort, and sabotage over honesty. I was no longer responsible for the consequences, and I no longer felt guilty about refusing to carry her pain. Because some doors do stay closed for a reason. Would you forgive someone who tried to end your life? Healing was not a straight line. Anyone who has lived through trauma learns that quickly. Some days felt like small miracles. Others felt like sliding backward into the same shadows I thought I had already escaped. But somewhere in the slow, steady work of physical therapy and rebuilding my life piece by piece, a new version of myself began to take shape. A quieter one, a stronger one, a version that belonged wholly to me. By early January, the physical therapy team at Evans Army Community Hospital finally gave me the news I had been hoping for. My legs had regained enough strength and stability to begin training with forearm crutches. It would be slow. It would be uncomfortable. It would hurt. But it was possible. I remember gripping the parallel bars for balance while the therapist adjusted the crutches under my arms. My hands trembled more from anticipation than weakness. When I took that first step, my muscles felt uncertain, as if they had forgotten how to obey commands. But the moment my foot touched the floor with my weight fully on it, a rush of something powerful moved through me. Not triumph, not pride. Something quieter. Something like returning. Step by step, session by session, I started to reclaim ground that once felt lost forever. The pain was sharp some mornings, deep and dull on others. But every time I stood upright, no wheelchair beneath me, I felt the world widen a little more. Around the same time, my phone began to ring more often. Veterans organizations, outreach coordinators, military support groups, people I had never met, but who had heard parts of my story after the incident at Fort Carson. One call came from the Wounded Warrior program itself, asking whether I would be willing to speak at an event in Denver. Not about the attack, not about the crime, about resilience, about recovery, about the quiet parts of service that people often misunderstand. My instinct was to decline. Being seen again felt vulnerable, exposed, but something inside me whispered that maybe telling the truth, not the violent part, but the part about surviving, might help someone else. So I agreed. The event was held on a cold February afternoon in a community center lined with photos of veterans from every generation. When I rolled out onto the small stage using one crutch for support, the room went still. I spoke slowly at first, waiting for my voice to find its shape. I talked about Afghanistan, about the blast, about waking up in a hospital with a different body than the one I had known. I talked about learning to ask for help, learning to rebuild, learning that strength sometimes meant being honest about fear. When I finished, the applause rose like a wave, warm and steady, carrying something inside it that I had not felt in a long time. Purpose. Afterward, a man wearing a Vietnam veteran cap approached me, his eyes bright with emotion. "Young lady," he said softly, "you reminded me that healing never stops. I needed that today." That was the moment I realized I wanted to keep doing this. Not because I wanted attention, but because I wanted connection. Real connection. Helping others made the pieces of my own pain settle into something less sharp. Back at Fort Carson, the leadership had not forgotten me. One afternoon, I received an unexpected email from General Elwood's aide requesting a meeting. The tone was formal, but the intent was unmistakable. They had something serious to discuss. When I arrived at headquarters, the general greeted me with the same steady presence he had shown from the start. He wasted no time. "Staff Sergeant Mercer, we would like to bring you on as a civilian safety consultant for pre-deployment training protocols. Someone with your first-hand experience and analytical ability could improve our risk evaluations and equipment checks significantly." The offer stunned me. It was not charity. It was not symbolic. It was a real position, a real responsibility, a real acknowledgement of expertise I had earned through years of service and months of recovery. I accepted. Work gave my days structure again, reviewing safety procedures, consulting on new mobility protocols, teaching younger soldiers how to advocate for themselves. Instead of my injury marking the end of my usefulness, it became the foundation of a new professional identity. Meanwhile, the legal process regarding my mother's house had finally concluded in my favor. The home in Colorado Springs officially transferred into my name the same week I began my new job. Walking into that house again, still using one crutch, but walking felt like stepping into a memory I had not been able to hold for years. The walls were the same soft cream color. The kitchen still smelled faintly of pine cleaner. My mother's favorite quilt still hung folded across the couch as if waiting for her. I stood in the middle of the living room, letting my hand trace the edge of the mantel. This house had once been a battlefield of tension between me and Vanessa. Now it felt like it was breathing again, like it remembered me. I decided then that the house would not remain a shrine to pain or conflict. It would become something new, something safe, something meaningful. Over the next few months, I restored it with deliberate gentleness. I painted the rooms soft colors that made the light settle warmly. I replaced old furniture with pieces that felt strong but welcoming. In the small spare bedroom, I created a reading space, a place where I could sit during long pain flares and feel grounded instead of trapped. The backyard I transformed entirely. I laid a stone path, planted lavender and sage, added a small wooden bench in the corner where my mother once drank her evening tea. Sometimes after work, I would sit out there with a blanket over my legs, the Colorado breeze moving through the flowers, and I would feel something loosening inside me. A kind of peace I had not known since long before the explosion, long before Vanessa, long before everything fell apart. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, I realized something quietly monumental. My life no longer revolved around what had been taken from me. It revolved around what I was building. Healing was slow, but it was happening, and it was mine. The final court date arrived with the quiet heaviness of something long expected, but still emotionally sharp. It was late March, 6 months after the investigation began, and Colorado Springs was in that strange early spring phase where the air felt both cold and full of promise. I arrived at the courthouse using one crutch, not because I needed to perform strength for anyone, but because each step reminded me I was no longer the woman who had rolled helplessly down a concrete slope. I had rebuilt myself one bruised inch at a time. The courtroom filled slowly. Prosecutors, detectives, journalists who had followed the case since the incident at Fort Carson. A few soldiers came too quiet and steady, offering nods of support from across the aisle. General Elwood was not present. His duties had pulled him to Washington for a strategy briefing, but he had sent me a brief message earlier that morning. "Justice always lands where it belongs. Hold steady, Staff Sergeant." Vanessa was escorted into the courtroom wearing a standard tan jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, her face pale and drawn. She looked smaller somehow, less like the woman who once stood over me with that cold, victorious gleam, and more like someone who finally understood that actions carried weight far heavier than excuses. When she glanced at me, her expression flickered through a dozen emotions: shame, resentment, panic, and something that looked dangerously close to hope. But I gave her nothing back. Not anger, not sympathy, just distance. Necessary distance. The judge reviewed the case summary aloud. The tampering with mobility equipment, the intentional sabotage, the push down the loading ramp, the recorded threat, the camera footage showing clear intent. The prosecution argued that the calculated nature of the act, combined with the vulnerability of the victim, warranted the maximum possible penalty. Vanessa's attorney attempted a plea for leniency, citing emotional instability, financial stress, and unresolved grief. But grief does not loosen brake screws, stress does not push a wheelchair downhill, and instability does not whisper threats with perfect clarity before committing harm. When the judge spoke, the room fell into absolute stillness. Vanessa Mercer is hereby sentenced to 12 years in state custody for attempted homicide and felony assault with aggravating circumstances. She will be eligible for parole after serving no less than 10 years. The words felt final in a way nothing else had. Not cruel, not triumphant, just final. I watched Vanessa's shoulders collapse as if the sentence itself had weight. Her breath hitched loudly enough for the microphones to pick up. She turned toward me once more, eyes red, swollen, trembling. "I am sorry, Rowan. Please. I know you hate me, but please." Her voice cracked like something breaking. I did not respond. A guard placed a gentle but firm hand on her elbow, guiding her toward the side door that led to the detention transport area. As she stepped through the threshold, I felt something inside me shift. Not joy, not revenge, just release. A clean, quiet release. The end of a long-held breath I had not realized I had been holding. When I exited the courthouse, the Colorado wind swept across the plaza, carrying that familiar mountain chill. Reporters shouted questions from behind the barricades, but their voices faded beneath the sound of the breeze. I paused on the top step, the stone warm under the afternoon sun. For the first time in months, the air felt wide open. My advocate stood beside me, waiting to help me down the steps, but I held up a hand. "Give me a moment. I wanted to feel this, truly feel it. Not the courtroom, not the verdict, not the past. Freedom, real freedom. The kind that comes not from someone else's punishment, but from reclaiming the parts of your life that fear once hollowed out." A few soldiers standing near the end of the walkway offered me small nods of respect. A military spouse reached out as I passed, squeezing my hand gently. "You deserved justice," she whispered. "And you got it." I made my way across the plaza, slower than most people, but steady. Every step was deliberate, grounding me in the present, instead of the memories that had once held me hostage. When I reached the edge of the parking lot, I stopped again, letting the wind push softly against my face. The same wind that had cut across the loading ramp the morning Vanessa tried to take everything from me. But this time it felt different. This time it felt clean. A life returning. A life rebuilding. A life no longer pushed by someone else's cruelty. In that moment, I realized something with absolute clarity. Family isn't who you're born with. It's who refuses to push you downhill. I said the words aloud quietly, letting them settle into the air and into myself. I thought of my mother, of General Elwood, of the soldiers who had stood by me, of the wounded warrior families who had sent letters, of the therapist who taught me to walk again. That was my family now, chosen, earned, respected, and nothing like the one I had left behind. As the sun dipped lower, a calmness settled into my chest, the kind that comes when the storm has finally passed. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything is honest, transparent, true. Justice had been served. My life was my own again, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Have you ever walked away from a toxic family member and finally felt free? Comment your city. Your story might help someone else tonight.